Kia ora everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this really important discussion. So I thought we'd start with just a bit of admin to get that out of the way. For those of you who are interested, an accurate transcript of this conversation will be made available afterwards, and there is also live transcribing for those who need it. So hopefully you've gotten in touch with about that. If we're speaking too quickly or you can't hear us, please let us know either in the chat function or in the little raise hand button. And that will also be used for questions towards the end of our session. And I think Blake and Charlie are here to help us out with all that side of things. Cool, so to get that out of the way, kia ora koutou katoa, my name is Alice, and I'm lucky enough to be the leader of the Disabled Students Association here at Te Herenga Waka. I'm also a law and arts student, majoring in film studies and sociology. I'm going to be around here at uni for quite a few more years, so you'll see me around a lot if you're still here as well. So a lot of my time and energy is dedicated to disability rights, and I've been lucky enough to work alongside other organisations such as Attitude Pictures, All Is For All and Imagine Better in my past. So yeah, for those of us who do not know much about the Disabled Students Association, I thought I may as well tell you a little bit about it. So we're the representative group for students with disabilities and impairments on campus. We run events such as this, give advice from the perspective of disabled students, and also seek to create a really warm and welcoming environment for all disabled students. Our organisation has very rich history, which is kind of the inspiration for this topic today. Because some of you may know us, by our former name Can Do. Can Do was actually established in 1992 and stands for Campus Abilities and Disabilities Organisation. So it was through the advocacy and work of Can Do that a separate service for students with disabilities was created on campus, which eventually became what we know as Disability Services today. So we recently changed our name to the Disabled Students Association, for we believe it encompasses our organisation's current kaupapa in a way that is more relevant to students today. So we want to reclaim the use of the word disabled and encourage pride. But the story of Can Do and its history is still extremely relevant for today's conversation and for our group. So without the dedicated and brave advocacy of students back in 1992, disability services and Victoria University as we know it may not have actually come into fruition. So I think this is an example of how the rights we enjoy today, not just as students, but as citizens, are often taken for granted. And they do in fact come through direct advocacy from the people who use them the most. And I think this is true throughout history. So Moldy communities, disabled communities, the LGBTQ community, they've only gained rights, unfortunately, through activism and civil struggle. I think it's the sad reality of the neoliberal society that we live in, and nothing is actually given without it being demanded. So the pertinent question that we're here to discuss today is how we actually affect the change we wish to see for the future. And to discuss this exact topic, we've invited an incredible group of people along to chat. Each of you have contributed to community advocacy and activism in one way or another, and have been super important role models for me, myself personally. And so we will be discussing and learning from their experiences of getting involved in advocacy, and hopefully come away with the knowledge and confidence to believe that everyone has the power to activate change. So without further ado, I'm privileged to introduce our panelists today. They're scattered around. We have Pati Umanga, if he wants to maybe just unmute himself so that he pops up.
Everyone.
Cool. Laura O'Connell-Rapira.
Good day, everyone. It's nice to be here.
Dr. Huhana Hiki.
Kia ora, everybody. Lovely to meet you all.
And Jala Tran Lawrence.
Good everyone, it's lovely to see you.
Awesome. So before we launch into some questions that are prepared, there'll also be room at the end for questions from everyone else. I would absolutely love it if all our awesome panelists could please introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about your journey to getting where you are today, and specifically how you got into the various forms of advocacy work you're all in. Pati, I thought maybe if you would like to begin.
Sure. Sorry, I need to apologise first because I'm sitting in my van in the car park so I can get to my next appointment, and the parking warden's just walked past and pointed his finger at me. So I'm not sure what's happening there. I just missed that last part of your question, Alice, sorry.
Oh, yes. I was just wondering whether you could tell us about your journey to getting where you are today, and also how you got to the various forms of advocacy work that you do at the moment.
Sure. Okay, well, firstly, talofa lava and whaftai mo lewa noa. I've always had a background in community development. I've done a lot of youth work in the past with street kids, and I guess I've had a sense of social justice from those days. Although I suspect it began earlier, but I wasn't aware of issues around social justice, social change, and human rights, basically. And during that time, I also got involved in Māori sovereignty issues through a woman, Donna Awatere, who was leading the Māori sovereignty movement at the time, and also got involved in the Springbok Tour protest back in '81. So back in those days, I was a walker, and it wasn't until 2005 that when I had an accident and had a fall, broke my neck, and I've been in a wheelchair ever since. So it's my 15th year anniversary this year. And it's been a journey of going back to the past for me to kind of recognize the future. And what I mean by that is that I knew that in terms of healing myself and kind of getting to a point where I could affect social change from a disability perspective and being involved in the disability scene, that I wanted to try and see if I can do the same kind of change that I had back in my days as a youth worker. So I got involved in a lot of mainstream issues. I wanted to find out what the lay of the land looked like for our Pacific disabled people. And to be honest, I was quite disappointed. I think the traditional method of trying to talk to government agencies around developing strategies and policies and trying to affect change from that level, it doesn't always hit the mark. And so for me, I tried other avenues of activism as such. And what I got into was music. And I wanted to use music as a way of challenging not just traditional kind of stereotypes towards people with disabilities, but also how we could find an innovative way of, I guess, protesting, advocating, activism. And for me, I know that a lot of the young people that I was dealing with, they found the traditional way of trying to do change, of having forums, meetings, and kind of all these advisory groups was quite boring. And it used a lot of bureaucratic speak. And so for me, I think some of the change needs to come from the grassroots, and the arts and music is one way that I think it could happen. So that's what I've been doing, is trying to develop music to try and find another avenue for our people to basically lead their own change.
Kia ora, thanks for that. Yeah, I think your story is super interesting, and I totally agree that a lot of young people are put off by the bureaucracy of some of this policy level things. I know personally it can be a bit of a drag sometimes. Great, cool. Laura, would you like to kick us off next?
Sure. Yeah, so my journey to activism and throughout activism has been sort of like this. If you imagine the line being this curly line that goes sort of up and down, because I have experimented with many different ways to try and make change. So I came to working in the NGO sector actually because I moved to England after high school, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I did know that I loved music festivals. And I wanted to work on music festivals, and I wanted to learn about how I could bring awesome music festivals to New Zealand. And I figured we're better to go and learn how to do that than Glastonbury in the UK. And so that's what I did. And so I moved to England, and I got a job as a volunteer coordinator at these music festivals that have like 50, 60. Nowadays they have like 200,000 people, but really big music festivals. And my job was to organize the waste and recycling volunteers. So it's the volunteers that would go and pick up rubbish basically and make sure that people were putting things in the right bins and the compost bins, etc., which actually is a pretty huge job when there's like 60,000 people at a festival. And the way that the model worked is that Oxfam would be paid by Glastonbury to provide, say, 200 or 400 volunteers. And the volunteers would get a free ticket as long as they worked, say, 8 to 16 hours over the duration of the festival. And so it meant that volunteers got to come for free. They got to volunteer for a good cause. Oxfam got money and Glastonbury got volunteers. And so it works really well for everyone involved. And so that was sort of my first introduction into like the way that you can think creatively about how you make the most of everyone's talents to create change. But what also happened is that when I was living in England, I happened to be there when they were having an election, and I was asking my friends who were activists and artists and things like that, who are you planning to vote for in the election? And most of them would say, I'm not going to vote because it doesn't make a difference. And I found that really interesting because from my perspective, I've always been like, we need to use all of the tools in our kete for creating change. And yes, a vote is not everything, but it is one part of all the things that we can do to bring forth the world that we want to see. And so when I came back to Aotearoa in 2014 or 2013, I decided to look into the statistics to see if young people were voting in low numbers in this country as well. And I found out that was the case. And so I, along with my flatmates and friends, started an organisation called Rock and Roll, which was basically, we would organise a bunch of parties all around the country where anyone could get a ticket as long as they enrolled and made a promise to vote. We weren't trying to get them to vote for any particular party, we were just trying to get people started with the voting habit, because research shows if you start young, then you'll continue voting for the rest of your life. And so what we would do is we would call every single one of the people who came to one of our gigs, which ended up being about 3,000 people all around the country in 2014, to be like, hey, where are you voting? Like, do you need any help with that? What's the issue that you're passionate about? So it was sort of a mixture of parties and political organising. And then when I was running Rock and Roll, which was mostly powered by volunteers and what I would call sweat equity, so like a lot of volunteer hours and a lot of hard work, I heard about this organisation called Action Station that was being brought to New Zealand, which was basically about bringing people power back to democracy, because the co-founders had found the limit of what you could achieve in terms of creating change within the parliamentary political system, and so they wanted to create something outside of that for anyone to take action on the issues that they care about. And so I heard about this and I was like, that sounds like what I should be doing, and I just emailed the co-founders again and again and again with campaign ideas till they hired me basically, and so now I've been at Action Station for 6 years.
Awesome, thanks for that. I think politics and parties sound like things that young people can get behind, I hope. Cool, Jala, you're up next, I think. Would you like to go?
Thanks, Alice. Kia ora, everybody. I'm Jala. I joke that I only really got into this space of activism. I particularly am involved in like feminist and sexual violence prevention activism in the past few years. However, when I say that, people who have known me since I was a kid say, no, you were always like this. You were just this tiny little ball of rage. You tried to fight everybody. So, you know, I don't know who's right. I started kind of understanding more about these issues when I was in undergrad and taking some criminology papers that looked at sexual violence and violence against women, and that kind of sparked a passion, I suppose, and I've been in the space ever since. And then I came back to New Zealand after I took like an OE, and I went back into my honours degree in criminology and specifically looked at around sexual violence and masculinity and prevention initiatives and men and that kind of thing. And during that year is actually when I met Alice, and I was helping out as the co-president of the feminist organisation, And then I also was the president of the Thursdays in Black VUW organisation, which is a tertiary-based sexual violence prevention campaign. And I also worked as a youth educator for Respect at Aotearoa, who are formerly the Sexual Abuse Prevention Network. So I go into high schools and teach around, facilitate around consent and sexual violence and gender and sexuality and that kind of thing. I've actually just walked in from a class talking to year 10 boys about consent, which was just amazing and I loved it. And then I also began tutoring for the university around sexual violence and human trafficking. And so since then I finished my honours and then I've did my master's in a similar subject around men's perceptions of sexual violence and rape culture. And I am now the national coordinator for that Thursdays in Black campaign and do various bits and pieces. As all of us know, we tend to, volunteer and have our fingers in many pies. So yeah, I suppose that's me. And my kind of driving force behind this is just looking and seeing the power of young people. I think young people are just phenomenal and really trying to push intersectionality at the forefront of everything I do to try and combat some of those, old age traditional views on what feminism is, and yeah, just make change in that area. I hope that answers your little intro question. Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. That was great. Cool. And then last but not least, Huhana, would you like to go?
Never least, I think. I might be short, but everyone seems to be able to find me in a crowd to try and avoid me. But kia ora everybody, my name's Huhana, Dr. Who for short. I always say the only reason I got my PhD was so that I could legitimately be the first female Doctor Who. And then they go and make her blonde-haired and blue-eyed, so they definitely don't know me at all. I am a huge sci-fi fan. I love Doctor Who. I love Star Trek. I do not like Star Wars. It's an action, not real sci-fi. But that's me. So you don't go on hating me because you love Star Wars. It's just different genre. But for me, I guess I don't think of myself as an activist. It's a term that's a very Pākehā term. I just happen to live my truth. And I've had to fight from birth. So I had to fight to live. I had to fight against, after I was adopted by, transracially adopted, I had to fight against my adoptive uncle from the age of 3. I had to fight my adoptive mum's alcoholism, depression from an early age, and I had to fight a lot of abuse. So a lot of my early life was one of anger, one of being abused, one of being walked over, walked around, had a lot of labels placed on. My adoption papers had me listed as an imbecile and an idiot, and I may very well be both. I mean, some people do call me idiots at times and some call me a bit of an imbecile, but you know what? I don't think you can predict that in a baby, but they apparently did. So I was never expected to achieve anything. So let's just say I was expected to just get married, have kids. Even the nuns at the Catholic school, when I said I wanted to be a nun because I was terrified of the idea of getting married, they just laughed at me and said, no, you'll only ever be any good to be a housewife and a mother. And that depressed the hell out of me, as though there was something bad about being a mother, but it was more the fact that that was what they thought I would do. And I'm of a generation that we weren't told that we could do anything we wanted. You know, I had a real fascination for biology, anatomy, physiology. I think I would have made a great doctor, but I was never headed that way. And it wasn't until my disabilities started to sort of show themselves, and I was doing nursing training, head of department said, oh, you're not very bright, Who? And so, okay, got into uni. The first year I got in, I had 3 A's, 2 B's, and 8 operations that year. One was a hysterectomy, and I still got 3 A's, 2 B's. I was a solo mum, raising a disabled child myself with my own disabilities, and realised I had a brain. So uni kind of gave me that. That first year I was there, all of a sudden I became the vice president of the student union because the president died. And this is someone who'd never been guided really around politics, whatever. I went to the Springbok Tour protest too, but I went with my older educated cousins, and I didn't know really why I was there, but I was busy on one side and my adopted dad was waving at me on the other side as he went to the rugby games. And I guess in some ways, he was the one though that taught me that he didn't care. He was a rabid national follower, loved Muldoon, all of that. So at the age of 14, he took me to go and see Muldoon, and he was walking down the aisle of the old Opera House in New Plymouth. And I looked at him, looked at my father, and I said, he's a bloody short man, isn't he, Dad? And it put politics in perspective that day. From that day on, Dad said to me, I don't care who you vote for. The important thing is that you vote. And so from that day on, I said, well, that's great because I'm never voting for them. And I went and exercised my vote. My own son, I taught him the same thing. He was the first in the door on the year he could vote to vote. And so I learnt then that there's one way you can have a voice, especially when you are in the world of being one of those ones that they marginalise, that they put down or put away. The only thing I've got is my ability to vote. And that's it. And the power in voting. And I've seen that power when we've collectively gotten together and done it. We've done it with some foreshore and seabed, 20,000 protested. I couldn't go, so I supported the students back at the university while they went, and we made sure they had all their notes and everything else. So I guess I don't really think about my activism. I just know I do what I need to do in order to do what we need to do to get to where we need to get. And sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail. But the key point is, if you're going to make a stand for something, and one of the things I don't understand about our disability community, and I'll be honest, why the heck are we so weak on standing up on issues? I have stood by myself in Aotea Square with placards because a woman was trapped upstairs for 3 years because the ministry took away her lift and refused to replace it. I have stood face to face with people spitting in my face while I've sat there in my wheelchair while they get abusive because of what I believe. And I will die for what I believe. And I don't hesitate in saying that because I'm not afraid. But when I've had to advocate for my community, most of them won't speak out, don't want to be identified because they're afraid. And society has made disabled people in particular afraid to speak out. Oh, you're going to lose your services. If you speak out like this, we're going to cut your hours. And for a lot of disabled, that's terrifying. The problem is they're not meeting our needs now. So how do you think by staying silent and by not speaking up that you're going to win? So I've started a new campaign because I believe now, 20 years ago, I got told by Ruth Dyson that it will never happen. So there was my whittle to tell her, get stuffed, it will happen. And it's taken me 20 years so far. But my new campaign now is to push for a Ministry for Disabilities and a Disabilities Act to be led by disabled, for disabled, and about disabled. I sit on the Human Rights Review Tribunal. How come none of you, when we have a bulk of complaints, none of you come to the tribunal to be heard? If you're not happy with the complaints, you can take it further. We don't charge you. It's free. We say to, our chairperson has made it very clear, if an individual loses the case, it doesn't matter if they're disabled, we won't charge them. Unless they're a vexatious litigator, which means they just come with all sorts of rubbish cases. But generally, we will not charge because it needs to be heard. The tribunal needs to hear the argument. I won't go on much longer. I identify as Māori. I'm also Sami, Navajo, and Aboriginal, so I'm from the Four Winds. The other thing here is that the predominant voices in our sector are Pākehā voices. They're not Māori, they're not migrants, they're not even really a lot of men in leadership. It's mostly women, mostly Pākehā, and there's nothing against that. But we are a diverse community. My grandson is half Filipino. My youngest son is half Caribbean. And I believe in diversity. We share the love in our whānau. We've got the bulk of it. So when you're looking at activism, when you're looking at your voice and finding your voice, you need to direct yourself, but you also need to look after yourself too. You're no good to anybody if you get sick. You have got to look after yourself. And one of those things is my passion and Pati. I remember the old Holiday Makers, a great band. And but music's my passion as well. I sing soul, gospel, jazz, and that's my passion. I'm losing my voice, but until I do, I sing. I also do artwork. I've just finished a cartoon of David Seymour for a community that want it, and that will be going out. I love sculpture, cartoon. I love cooking. I'm a foodie. We are all that. We're not just our political persons. We are also a mother, a wife, a partner. We're all sorts of people. We're children of, parents of, grandparents of, and we need to be able to celebrate all of that. But to do that, we're going to have to get loud, guys, because we are behind the rest of the Kiwis in New Zealand to get ourselves heard. And if we keep staying silent and you get into your job and your government job and they start to gag you, just remember that's another voice lost in the activism world around disability. And every voice here is important to that. Thank you.
Kia ora. Yeah, that was super inspiring. Thank you for that. Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said, and just the importance of speaking out and knowing when to take space and make space is something that I know I think about a lot. Cool, so I'm sorry to bring it back to you, Huhana, but you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I thought, so for those who don't know, as someone, you have a background in human rights law, being the inaugural solicitor at Auckland Disability Law. So I was wondering whether you could speak to the main barriers that you perceive in people exercising the rights that we have under the law, because I think that from my understanding, the big thing with demanding your rights is that you can't demand that which you don't know actually exists. And I think when it comes to human rights, there are some breaches in Aotearoa that simply go unnoticed. I'm thinking like the wage exemption policy for disabled people and many others. So it's a big question, but I was wondering whether you could, talk to why you think that is and how we can get over that barrier and try to bring more awareness to what rights we have and then how we can exercise them.
We're a very polite people, Kiwis. I really envy the international activist movement of the disabilities overseas. I mean, they chain themselves to gates, for goodness sake. I die of the day when I can chain myself to something. People say, well, why are we so behind in our activism? Well, I remind them, Rosa Parks really led a big movement that grew when she refused to move on the bus. We can't even get on the bus to begin with. So we get missed as the bus goes by because it's not accessible to us. What we should be doing is chaining ourselves to the bus and then stopping them from going further without us. And so that requires that we need more and more of you to look at standing for the different political parties and to be demanding not to get back on the list at number 54, but for higher placements. It is absolutely patronising, paternalistic bullshit that we have our disabled candidates so far down the list that they can say, oh, we've got the disabled candidate, but, you know, they're at number 54. You know, you just vote for us and then they've got a chance. Well, they've got no shit show in hell. And we've had a lot of people stand, and we had Mojo for one term, and then they put us so far down the list that they basically, they insulted the rest of us. One of the issues coming through Parliament right now is the euthanasia debate. And, you know, the disability voice has been ignored, is not heard. And I know not everyone will agree that that they don't want it. Some will want it. That's absolutely fine. But the disability voice, the Māori voice, has not even been heard on this. And so we're about to vote on a law that will effectively do what's happening now to Māori disabled. So let me give you a quick example, and this is why I'm doing the work I'm doing. In 1996, Roe Williams was killed by the state because he was mildly disabled, an older Māori man, needed dialysis. They said no. So what happens is it went to court. The whānau said, we'll pay for his dialysis. We just want a bit more time with Uncle because we just want to be able to gather the whānau to say goodbye. The state time and time again refused, and he was essentially euthanized involuntarily by denying him dialysis. That's 1990s. I was undergrad in law school then, and that's what opened my door up to human rights. Then in 2010, when I was the solicitor for Mangere Community Law Centre, I was contacted about Robert Namu. Similar scenario, brain injury, needed dialysis, Māori man, Northland, same one. Roe was from Northland as well. And the state said no, that was under Jonathan Coleman. No, we have to ration our healthcare and he doesn't qualify. I don't know whether he didn't qualify because he was Māori or whether he didn't qualify because he was brain injured, or he certainly wasn't of an age to disqualify. Again, another man who died drowning in his fluids as he was denied dialysis. We now have in Whangarei Hospital right this minute that the media don't know about, and I've got to be careful here. However, this is a whanaunga, and I won't genderise or anything, but this whanaunga had a massive brain aneurysm and survived. Went to Whangarei. We came to Auckland Hospital with Flowen. They're on a ventilator and they've lost all movement except for a couple of fingers, but their mind's fine. They got transferred back to Whangarei because Auckland Hospital said, we can't afford them here anymore. We can't do anymore. Sent them back. Whangarei, the doctor said, we want to put a DNR, do not resuscitate on them. Oops. And I said no. Well, they said no. And she said herself, she wants to live. There's always an assumption that disabled people want to die. They noted they wanted to live. Now, the doctors have said, no, we can't afford you. We want to send you home so you can die at home. So essentially, I've told the whānau, you need to get a lawyer and you need to get in there and stop it, because it's happened to 3 of my whānau members over the last 5 years, where they're in Northland, they refuse to treat them and they die. So this person at the moment wants to live, but because they're so severely disabled, the state wants to kill them. So we don't need legalised euthanasia. Frankly, disabled get euthanised anyway. So we need to be aware of certain issues, and some of them are quite serious. We have a lack of housing access. Now, when I was on Kāinga Ora briefly, I was described as an irritant to the board because I got the first disability access plan in place for the first time in 70 years. So then they got rid of me after that. But I got it in place, so I'm happy because that means they're now obligated. They want only 15% of housing, New Zealand houses, to be accessible. We need it to be 100% because they're a state provider. We have less than 3% of our people in access housing, which means 97% don't have appropriate housing or are being hidden by living at home with mummy and daddy when young adults should be out in their own environment, or they're seniors getting put into residential care because we have no housing for them. So that's something that you can get involved in. There's, the housing movement, the elections. You need to say whether or not you believe in something. Our young people, we've got to provide them with the information. So you need to be educating those at university about how to vote. What do the referendums mean? Provide it in all formats for them. Support them to make their decisions and get people to the polling booths. Because honestly, I've been fighting for a long time. I'm now seen as one of the senior leaders. It's this next generation, you guys, that are going to be the important part of change. I'm going to die before I see a ministry. I'll be dead before I see a Disabilities Act, but I'm not going to stop pushing for it. You guys are the ones who are going to hold it through to the next level, and that's why I'm here, because I really want to encourage you to keep your voices there. The Human Rights Act is not well known. Health and Disability Commissioners Act is not well known, and yet we are being abused every single day under that act. So learn about it, understand it, and start advocating in your communities for change by telling them about it. Teach people their rights, they won't shut up, and that's a good thing.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think it's so true that, well, everything you said is true and amazing. I think that, yeah, we all have a bit of responsibility, I think, especially as students, to be educated ourselves and then educate others and those around us, whether that's family members, though we all know that politics chat with family members can often be complicated. But yeah, I think it's so important to have these conversations with everyone. And yeah, just to emphasize that, the housing crisis is a human rights issue. And, it completely goes against the United Nations Convention on Disability Rights, because we have a right to housing and we have a right for not to be living in poverty, but unfortunately so much of the disabled community is. So yeah, I think, as I said, I think a lot of students sort of on a smaller scale within university itself do not know what is actually on offer for them at university. So they might not know what services are available, thinking disability services, or what rights they have. And I was wondering, Jala, I think you've done a lot of work here, and also Huhana, you've done a lot of work in the tertiary sector. I was wondering whether you might have some advice regarding navigating the power imbalances that exist within these long-standing institutions like universities, and how can students ensure they're getting the services that they have a right to, which I think is particularly pertinent at the moment when, years disabled students were saying, we want lecture recordings, and then it only just happened because of a global pandemic. So yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to your experience on affecting change within an institution as a student. And yeah, awesome.
Sure thing. Thank you for your question. I think the power imbalances is a really important thing to talk about, because there's this kind of individualization responsibility of like, oh, you know, you just go and do your thing, like you just go and ask them for it. And it's so naive to expect young people, particularly undergraduate students, to just be perfectly comfortable to walk up to management or HR or whoever it is and demand something that they may not fully understand what their rights are. And I think that's really naive and really harmful to put that on people. So like simply recognizing that there is inherent power dynamics within an institution that is as elitist and as colonial and as ridiculous as a university is a huge step forward for these conversations, because it's not something that's talked about a lot. And for young people to simply recognize that, you know, I have this thing that I want dealt with, and actually this is not an equal playing field, and I am going to need extra support, and that's totally valid and okay, and it shouldn't be like this, but this is the way it is. And basically understanding that equity of like, yes, we need extra support to level that playing field. And I think part of that is something that DSA and other organizations like DSA are doing, is providing a community where, I mean, we know power in numbers, strength in numbers, that kind of thing. Like, students can feel so isolated, and like they're the only one in the world experiencing this thing they're experiencing. And I work as a tutor, and I get 10 students with the same issue coming to me saying, nobody understands me. And I just want to push them all in a room together and be like, look after each other. So empowering students to be like, here are your communities, here are the people who will stand with you and stand by you, and your advocates who all have this huge variety of lived experience and knowledge and are experts in their own experiences, who can assist you in this process. And being able to form that community and to confront whoever is needed to be confronted at a university is a huge thing for students. And it enables so much change when people feel like they're not alone, because I know in a lot of communities of, you know, oppression, disabled communities, for example, they can feel so isolated. And that is partially physical isolation due to accessibility issues, and partially just due to this complete lack of awareness around certain things. So creating these communities of awareness and communities of support, and just to be able to talk with each other, I think is a huge step forward in challenging those power imbalances. And also having these conversations of like, a university is not a neutral, unbiased, equal institution. It is absurd, and it is built to privilege a particular type of person who is realistically like 9% of the population. And that is something that really drives me crazy. So that is my very convoluted answer to your question. I'm sure Huhana can probably add on to that.
I'll try and be quick. I want the other voices there. You're going to have to be prepared to fight. Know that you are going to face barriers, okay? Know that it's not going to be easy. But the whole point of succeeding is being prepared to stand up. So half of it's bluff, all right? I went in at AUT one time when I was lawyer for ADL, and I had a client who has dysphagia, dyspraxia, but wanted to do the culinary course. And they said, no, you can't do it. You know, you've got to do this independently. You're not allowed to do it with help. And anyway, we got them to agree that a support person and see how it went. Came out with 90% above and won awards that year. The second year, went back, met with the lawyer. They were declined again, went back there. We agreed to another plan. They got another year, came out in their 90s. Third year, final year, no. The lawyer took one look at them and said, well, you better sort it out or else we've got a human rights case. So often, you know, the very thing you're afraid of doing, which is confronting someone, is do it. And one of those things is, do not, like, one of the things I teach my young guys, especially my young nephews who are Moldy, lippy little buggers, I say to them, the minute that a cop's going to stop you, because they will, because you're brown, do not swear at them, do not give them lip. Say your name, give them your address, and say to them, am I under arrest? If they say, well, like, you know, yes, then what am I under arrest for, please? They tell you, then tell them, thank you, take me to the station, I would like a lawyer, please. And that's it. And I actually did that when we had the, what was it, the 99, the 1%, it was when people were locking down over in Auckland, in Aotea Square, and camping. And I remember it because the police came without tags. I wasn't involved. I was actually going to meetings. And one day the police van came and they were arresting everybody. So I yelled out the Bill of Rights Act to them all. A lot of them remembered that, and afterwards they exercised that and they didn't get charged. Know your rights, but if you don't know your rights, then go and get some support. Be prepared to get knocked back. You know, I got knocked back time and time again through my academic years, and then when I was briefly at AUT as a lecturer, I had no support. I got knocked back, and the students were getting support, but the staff didn't. So don't be prepared that things are going to come to you on a platter. They won't. So be prepared that you will have to fight. But to do that, you need the tools. So get the support you need, learn what you need to learn, know the legislation, understand what your rights are, and you're going to be fine. But you need to realise there's nothing to be scared of in exercising your rights. That fear is them because they're afraid that you will take it further. Not that they're afraid that you won't, they're afraid that you will. So the more that you push, the more they'll become afraid. Change doesn't come without agitation. You can't clean the washing without agitating the soap powder and everything in there. So just remember, keep yourself safe by knowing your rights and getting the support you need to go forward and exercising them.
Yeah, I just add on to that as well. I think it's also about like finding your advocate, finding your person, because, you know, not everyone has the same ability to access the same services, as terrible as that is. And there are people, like everyone, for example, in this call, people who will stand up and who will do that. What is necessary? Because obviously, and I think this is something that we might talk about later, resistance looks different in so many different ways. And not everyone is comfortable yelling in the streets, and that is totally valid. And finding that person who will be that person while you do what is right for you in that space. And there are advocates of all different types of people, whether that's a student leader or a university employee or your tutor or one of us, whoever it is, that person will stand up and be like, no, I will back you. I will do whatever you need. And connecting with those people it can be life-changing, because for a lot of people who have experienced marginalization, they haven't had that person, they haven't felt that, and that can change someone's entire life, entire worldview. So if you're somebody who's like, I really want to help, but I don't know what to do, make yourself a champion of these issues. Put yourself forward, proactively be like, I'm here, I will stand for you. Don't like push yourself on people, because that's unnecessary, but just stand there and be like, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I do. And then make yourself available.
Awesome, that was great. I think just for those, if there are any people who are out there thinking, oh, I would love to get some of these services that might help me, I'd really recommend community law and services like Know Your Rights if you have any issues. And also VUSA has an advocacy person who you can get in touch with, and they will help you with any issues with course coordinators or staff. So I thought I'd just put that out there. Cool. So I think, Joel, you kind of touched on this, but party, and you also touched on this party in your intro, but a lot of young people, you know, want to affect change, but as we've kind of established, not quite sure how to go about it. And I think there is a misconception that advocacy is about, you know, being the angry person, the grassroots activism, you know, protests, writing, all the stuff that, you know, we all do. But you have also affected heaps of change through your music and been awarded for it, for your contribution to Pacifica music. And yeah, I was wondering whether you could speak to that and potentially give us some advice on how we can draw on our strengths and passions to really like create change in a creative way and create the change that we wish to see. Oh, sorry, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, look, one of the things I want to say is that as a Pacific Islander, you know, we have a different way of approaching what I guess you might describe as our own way of protest. Historically, you know, we had a movement back in the 1920s called the Mau movement. And that was basically a protest movement that was led by our people to wrestle away from the administration of the New Zealand government. And what we did was or what our people did was they did you know, it was always about a peaceful protest, because that was the way of our people, was in peace, in humility, in dignity. That was always be our approach. So they had this march, and we had our spiritual leader, Tamasese, who was leading it, and he actually got shot by the soldiers. And as he lay dying, he stressed the value of peaceful protest for our people, despite the fact that there was a violent confrontation. And I know that we've been brought up within our own psyches to trust people in power, to trust the experts, to always believe that they have the answers for us. And in a lot of ways, that kind of led us to be not so much, how can I put it, just to be silent and to be exploited anyway, but there are different ways of doing that. And so for me, my grandfather wrote a musical piece out of what happened in that incident, and it's quite an iconic song, and it's called Bese o le Mau, which is a song of the Mau. And why I wanted to try and highlight that is because historically we've had things that have happened to us around colonization, around religion playing a huge part in coercing our people into submission, and not questioning the powers that be. And so as we, with each generation, that's always passed on as such, to, you know, to never question. And I know now at this stage, when I see some of our families who are dealing with people who have family members who are disabled, they're frustrated with the system because they don't want to question it, or they feel like they're powerless, so they just get on with it and do it themselves. So for me, why I chose music for our young people is because it has the ability to change perceptions. And I hope I'm answering the question, but what I do know is that music has played a big part as a form of narrative, as a form of storytelling, and therefore its validity in terms of actually being part of a movement that suggests activism, protest, social justice is inherent in us as, or I'll speak as a Samoan. So I try and pass that on in terms of young people, in terms of the arts, because some of they're so connected to music, for example, contemporary music. And there are a lot of our artists who are now coming out as Pacific artists, yet I don't see disabled Pacific artists. So for me is, okay, what happens when we get our people there? They start to, for example, I had a music video called Shiva, and it's all about dancing. I had a whole lot of disabled people in it. We're all dancing and having a good time. But in other people's perceptions, we don't actually, they don't believe that we could move, that we could dance, that we have artistic creativity within us. And for me, that challenges the system, and that's another form. So I always think that it's not so much a out there in your face style of protest, but it's a way of complementing others and building the confidence in our own people to be able to take part in other forms of social change.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think music is such a powerful tool, and I think music kind of gets to the core of what it means to be human in a way, what it means to live in a community, and that's what we're all kind of fighting for as well, that everyone within communities are recognized. Yeah, awesome. So I think, Laura, I guess it's the same with you with Action Station. You have also shown the power of sort of creative forms of change and people power change, and how small actions carried out by large groups of people can be hugely successful. And I think that a lot of the issues we see in the world today feel huge. I'm thinking like climate issues and poverty, and there's always that hesitation that I'm one person too small to affect change. So I was wondering whether you could tell us a bit more about Action Station and maybe give some advice as to how we can take practical steps that don't seem too daunting to make a difference in the face of some of these overwhelming issues.
Sure, I'll do my best. It is true that it can be very difficult to create change within systems as an individual. And so I think Jala's point earlier about working with others, building a community of support around you, particularly a diverse community in terms of experience, thought and contribution, because you don't want to, like, no one, like, we're not going to create a fair, flourishing, beautiful, like, future for disabled Pacifica, Maori, migrant, gay, Muslim people with like an all-white social movement of like cis, you know, hetero, able-bodied folk. And so our movements need to be as diverse as the world we're trying to build. So that's one thing, is that work with other people. The other thing is that I think it's really important to, I always say to my team that good campaigns are like 80% research and 20% tactics. And it doesn't mean that you need to go away and do like a PhD on whatever issue it is that you're trying to solve, but it does mean you need to think about a few key things. You need to think about, what is your vision? Like, what is your goal? What is it that you are trying to achieve? If you achieve everything that you manage to achieve, how will the world be different? And I think starting with vision is important, because I think the more we can articulate our vision, the more likely it is we'll be able to bring it into being. And what I mean by that is I find myself in rooms with activists quite a lot of the time, and we'll do this we'll stand up in a circle and people will go around the room and people will be like, oh, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm passionate about climate change. I'm so-and-so, I'm passionate about child poverty. But of course, they're not passionate about climate change and child poverty. What they're passionate about is is nurturing the earth and its ability to nurture life and all its diversity. They're passionate about every single child having the ability to unlock life's opportunities and to have fun and be a kid. And so I think starting with vision is really important, and then breaking it down into a goal that you can actually achieve. And so no one is going to believe you when you say, sign this petition to stop climate change. Like, that's not a thing. We all know that a petition is not going to stop climate change. However, if your petition is, oh, hi, we're Generation Zero and we want to build a protected cycle lane through K Road because we want to make it easier for people to cycle as a solution to climate change and as a way to enable people to travel more easily in the city in ways that aren't so carbon intensive, then that's a believable tactic for the goal that you are trying to achieve. And so breaking down your lofty aspirations into more achievable goals is another important step in doing that 80% of the research and work that you do before you go into tactics. It's also important to think about who are the people that have the power to change what it is that you are trying to change. Because that's the person that you're going to be targeting your energy and your time towards. And so to give you an example, we had a young person, Lucy, who she struggled with mental ill health and anxiety and depression throughout her high school years. And she was like from quite a privileged school. She went to like a decile 9 school. And she was going to see like a private counsellor, but she was lying to her friends about where she was going when she was going to counselling. And then one day she just decided to be honest with her friends because she couldn't live this sort of double life anymore. And then lo and behold, her friends were like, oh my gosh, I'm also going to therapy. Oh my gosh, I'm also going to counselling. And what they realized from those conversations is that they didn't have anything happening in their school in which they were being facilitated to talk about their mental health and to share their experiences and to share tools and knowledge from their own experience. And so what she decided to do after she left high school was she started a petition calling for better mental health education in all schools. And then she worked with a group of her high school friends, and then they went back to their high schools and worked with the various activist groups to basically go around and collect signatures by hand. We worked with her to place a bunch of stories in the media, to make some social media videos where she was just talking about why she was passionate about this issue. And then we managed to get that petition up to about 10,000 signatures. She went and delivered that to her local MP, who was David Seymour. And at this time, he was the Associate Minister of Education, I believe. And so he was also a relevant person to deliver it to, because he obviously has the ear of the Education Minister. And then what happened after that is she got the opportunity to present her case to Select Committee about what better mental health education in schools could look like. And at that point, she rallied a bunch of different young people to talk about what their dreams and hopes are for this kaupapa. And that is now going on to inform the curriculum that is being developed around how mental health education will be taught in schools. And so that started from a conversation with a friend to reaching out to an organisation like Action Station to on a target that has the power to change what it is that you're trying to change, and then working away over time to actually turn that from an idea into a reality. she did that all before the age of like 21. And so like people can do incredible things when we work together, when we have a plan, and when we are, like Huhana says, willing to accept that there will be setbacks, there will be challenges, but you just need to keep going anyway.
Awesome, thank you. I think that was some really good advice. I'll definitely be keeping all that in mind next time we come up against some things as a club. Yeah, so I guess another question for anyone actually. Obviously, so there are some young people who are really like inherently into politics for some reason or another, and a lot of the time, like they're kind of in a bubble. So I know I'm in a bit of a political bubble with me and my peers. But obviously that's not the case with all young people. And I was wondering if anyone might have some insight or thinking about what are the main barriers stopping youth from getting into political issues and other sort of social issues that come from that, and how can we all work to combat it, both youth and politics? And yeah, what are some ways that we can try and get people engaged in politics, especially as we come up to 2 extremely important referendums and the election? Don't know if anyone wants to put their hand up to go first, or oh yeah.
I can say some stuff on that just because I have done a lot of research about young people and their political voice. The first thing I will say is that when we talk about young people not voting, it's really important to also acknowledge that the young people who are least likely to vote of the young people are usually young people with disabilities, young people who live in rural areas, young people who are also Māori and Pacifica or migrants of colour. And so they're people who have been let down by our society, our economy, our democracy. And so of course, why would they necessarily feel inspired that if they somehow engage in this democracy, economy, society that has let them down so much that they will be able to fix it? And so that's just one of the realities that we're dealing with, is that young marginalized people are ignored, and then we're somehow, like young people are somehow expected to get over all of that and fix it. At the same time, if young people do not get over all of that and fix it, it will not get fixed. And so like there's sort of this very complex message there, which is like, yeah, it's not your fault that the economy has let you down and that politicians don't represent your interests, but unless you do anything about it, it's always going to be that way. And I think there's something potent in having that conversation with people in a very real way. You don't start with that because that's a bit intense. Like no one wants to hang out at the pub with like, you are the only one that can fix the things. But you start with, I think, vision and dream and aspiration. And so often when you talk to people who aren't necessarily what you would consider to be politically engaged, they will often, and I've seen this in my own whānau of people who do not vote, but they do have fully articulated visions of how the country and their community would be different if things were different. And so I often like to talk to my whānau and friends who don't vote about what are the things that you would like to change in our society. And then they tell me this wonderful vision of how things would be different, and I'll be like, oh, cool. Why do you think it's not like that yet? And then they will usually articulate something which is like, oh, because governments don't listen to us, because the white man rules everything, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, oh yeah, true. How do you reckon we could change that? Usually only, and then they'll arrive at their own conclusion most of the time, which is like, oh, I guess like only if like social movements happen or communities come together, or like we rally behind like someone who's going to do something different. And I was like, awesome, should we do that? And so it's about having a sort of structured conversation that starts with vision, leads into barriers of that vision, like why isn't that happening, and then ends with a call to action, which is how can we change that? How can we collectively move past this barrier to paddle the waka towards this vision that we both have? And I find that to be quite an effective method.
If I could go next, if that's okay. Sorry, I've got to go soon to my next appointment, but just following on from what Laura was saying, I think I totally agree. And in terms of, for some of our disabled Pacifica youth, for me, it's about the fact that you want to try and bring them together to have this talanoa, this kōrero, about what politics means for us in our own cultural context. And I think that in terms of, because you want to provide them with a safe environment that they feel quite comfortable in to be able to have that conversation. And also, you know, to build that trust, you then can, because what I'm aware is that the reason why we want change is because we as disabled will want to lead our own change. We don't want to be led all the time. And so, which is what's happening now. So how can we actually change that role of leadership and ownership so that they can participate in the political environments as well? And so for me, you know, music does that, but when you bring them together for something like music or arts, it's how you bring out the conversation of the importance of being politically involved and being able to use the arts as a platform to have that pathway. Because one of the things I see right now for our people, our young people, is there's no pathway or a plan of succession for them to take over from other leaders who have managed to be in a position of leadership for quite a few years and may be quite comfortable in that setting. But when is the time for them to move on and let the young people come through and start taking over their ownership for themselves? So for me, in a cultural context, if we have a gathering that we could bring people in and say, for example, as Pacifica, and say, look, you know, this is what the cultural context can mean for us in our own islands, because even though we're Pacifica, the whole importance of intersectionality is also crucial, and also diversity, because we're not just Pacifica, and that's what happens with labeling. You get thrown into this group approach, but under Pacifica, we are Samoan, we are Tongan, we are Niue, you know, we've got 8 or 9 different nations under there. And so for me, being able to have that cultural context as your platform for stepping into a political arena is really crucial. And thank you. If I do disappear, I do apologize. I have to kind of take off to my next appointment, but I'll try and stay on as long as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And just before you disappear, I'll just say, yeah, thank you so much for joining today, Pati. We really appreciate your insight and all the mahi you do in this area. I know it does not go unnoticed. And yeah, thank you so much for joining and for all your amazing insight.
I appreciate being here. Thank you very much, everyone. I really enjoyed it.
Great. Huhana, I think, did you want to speak to this point?
I guess, and Pati, you know, that you nailed it. It's sometimes we're forgetting in the disability community, we've gone and diverted. In 2000, we had a really good collective approach to advocating. And a lot of us that are now in the older range of leaders, we were all part of the State of the Nation report that was done by the Human Rights Commission under Rosalind Noonan then. And boy, our voice was strong, it was powerful, and we got this amazing report out, but we've actually got nothing since. And part of that issue is we've gone very impairment-based. So, you know, if you're not autistic, then we've got that group, and they'll get FAD funding from the Ministry of Health for that moment, which is, you know, they're the latest favourite little group to do research on. And then you get the other little group, the blindies, they've got a different network. And the problem you've got is by breaking us up, we have lost that human rights collective approach. Now, when you think about it, a lot of the conservatives, they abuse liberals by calling them snowflakes. Well, I smile at that and I go, thank you so much. And they look at me and I go, well, a snowflake on its own does melt and dissipate quite quickly. But can you imagine a whole bunch of snowflakes together? That's an avalanche. And we can never, ever, ever move individually far. I've done this alone for over 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And it's only just recently that people have started to hear what I've been saying and are coming on board. And you know what? It's finally being heard that we're pushing for a Disabilities Act and a Ministry on Disabilities. It's taken that long. You cannot move far on your own. But if you're also going to just sit and say, the blindies get everything, the deafies don't, you know, then what you're doing is you're starting to hierarchy our disability networks, and we're saying, oh, we're physically disabled, you don't need accommodations. But they forget that we are also very intersectional. I'm a brain injury survivor, I've got glaucoma, I'm hearing impaired, I don't wear my hearing aids, as well as physically disabled. So I cross many of those networks. I'm ADD, as well as they think I'm a bit autistic as well, which I could be, I don't know, never been diagnosed. Why is it so important we focus on our diagnosis rather than focus together on human rights issues? I think that's where we've gone and distracted ourselves. We all don't have to be rabid activists with a big fist in the air saying, you know, disabled lives. I'm not going to say matter because that's Black Lives Matter slogan. I'm not stealing off them. But, you know, disabled lives count. You know, not everyone's that. Some people are background people. Some people write letters. I do poetry as a way of explaining it. But also, we're not homogenous either. I'm Moldy with MS. You know, the MS neurologists discriminate against me because they don't believe that Māori get MS. But despite me finding research that says we do, but at 2.5 times less than others. But I'm Moldy, and I can't escape from that identity. And no one should minimize or put down their own identity. You are who you are, and you should celebrate all of that. Now, you know, I don't identify in any way as Pākehā because I'm not. I'm very pale skinned because my dad's Sami, which means he's the Indigenous people of the Scandinavian region. So that's why, and I'm proud of it all. You know, our identity is a part of who we are. If I'm proud of who I am, whether it be cultural, whether it be my impairment, whether it be my gender, my sexuality, celebrate it. But for goodness sake, don't go attacking each other anymore in our community. We attack too much. One lot, the ACC lot, they get everything. You know, Paddy, you're a rich fella. And us poor MOH guys, we get $12,000 for a van if we're lucky. You get the $130,000 vans. Boo. But, you know, we can't keep attacking on each other because Paddy and I are still, in our words, we're brother and sister in this journey together. And we've got to stop using the privilege that some have with being ACC or being blind on a benefit and still getting the benefit and working. We've got to work together and say, well, okay, this is unfair. How do we make it fair? And the only way to do that is to work together. And the other thing is I mentor informally a lot of younger people. And the reason I'm doing that is I know my voice needs to start to go in the background because I need to be there to support you guys. As I get older, my disability gets harder to manage. And what I've got left is my years of experience and my skills. So for me, it is about me mentoring your voice to take you forward, however you want to do that, because you guys are the actual future. You're going to shape it. So when I have a student that says, can you supervise a paper? And I still do some supervision and it's on this and this. Well, I love it because what they're doing is they're taking, say, my idea or some of us other older ones' ideas and they're taking it in a new direction. Don't be afraid to challenge us oldies. Don't be afraid to challenge our writing, our academic work. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I've had enough and this is what we're facing. I mean, one of the things I've had to accept is that I've got certain amounts of plastic on my body that goes into the landfill, and that's my catheter and other stuff. And, you know, some of us have pads and stuff and it all goes into landfill. Why? I can't change much of that personally, but I can advocate that we get more environmentally friendly products that meet our medical needs as well. You know, we have old-fashioned vans that aren't electric vans that we need to keep using while they keep legislating away and pricing us out of the market. What you've got to do is start advocating that they have vans that they can be modified so that the future generation can have vehicles they can afford to be independent. So what all I can do now in my time of life is to begin the role of mentoring. And that's what I'm here for, and that's what I'm sort of trying to say.
I'm just gonna, Alice, if we've got some time, I might quickly add on to the politics thing. Cool. So I find the question of young people in politics really, really interesting. So, you know, I'm young-ish, queer, brown, refugee migrant background. And when I was a younger person, I didn't see anyone that looked like me in politics. I grew up fairly rural. To me, politics was white men in suits in cities. And that was something that I didn't connect with on any level. And I had some kind of vague knowledge that, oh yes, it affects me and I experience all of these things. But there was just wasn't even fathomable, this idea that me and all of this had a potential to actually make change. So I think that, you know, politicians have a responsibility to people of diverse backgrounds, particularly to young people of diverse backgrounds, to make their politics accessible. And part of that is people who have the privilege to be in those spaces is to challenge politicians and be like, what are you saying to these communities? What are you doing for these communities? What are you doing that is proactive? What do you say to them? And not everyone obviously has the ability to be in those spaces, and that's why those that do, I think, have the responsibility to do that. So that, you know, I mean, my little sisters now have this massive crush on Gauri's Garaman because she looks like they do. And I think that's absolutely wonderful and life-changing. So it's also, you know, being able to empower those who want to enter politics and actually be like, actually, politics is for everyone. Anyone can run for politics if they have the right support and the right knowledge. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, because for some of us, that idea is just great. Like, you don't do that. You don't just run for politics, but you can, and people do, and people should do that. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think we've seen that also not just with national politics, but with local bodies. So with Tamitha Paul, obviously, after being used to the president, is now in Wellington City Council. Cool, so I think I'll probably say that if you've got any questions, those in this Zoom chat, now would be a good time to pop them in the chat function if you can, or yeah, that's probably the best way to do it, and then we can do that. And then while that's happening, I thought I have a general conversation that I thought could be good to discuss. So I think there's this really interesting quote that I like by Bell Hooks, who, I don't know if anyone, yeah, though Jal, you know, I'm sure a lot of people know. She's a feminist, a Black feminist writer, and she wrote, "Moving from silence into speech is for the oppressed, the colonized, the exploited, and those who stand and struggle side by side, a gesture of defiance that heals, that makes new life and new growth possible. It is that act of speech, of talking back, that is no mere gesture of empty words, that is the expression of our movement from object to subject, the liberated voice." So I really like that quote because I think it kind of speaks to the idea that for those of us who are a part of minority groups, our mere presence in spaces like this and in tertiary spaces and just literally anywhere is in itself an act of resistance, which I think can be quite an empowering thing to think about when we fall into that trap that, you know, I'm not advocating or I'm not being an activist in the way that I should. Like, for instance, I don't attend protests because physically I cannot. And so I'm like, does that make me, you know, a good democratic citizen or political citizen, an ally? And so I was wondering if anyone would want to speak to the idea of being a good advocate and the concept of sort of owning, as you said, Huhana, before, sort of owning yourself and how the mere act of pride in your own identity is in itself resistance, and how talking back, as Bell Hooks said, is in itself a form of resistance. And yeah, I don't know if that made any sense, but
I think Laurel would be very good.
Oh.
Yep, you go.
Yeah, I love this quote, and we use this idea a lot when working with victim survivors of harm, saying that, you know, your existence is a form of resistance. And I think, you know, in a world or a society or community where it is specifically designed to silence certain people and to stop them from thriving, from succeeding, and to make them as small and as inconsequential as possible, simply existing and thriving and succeeding is the biggest act of resistance. And there are some spaces where it is not the responsibility of those who are being harmed to be the ones in that space. It's not the, you know, it's not the responsibility of the oppressed to explain to the oppressor their oppression. That's ridiculous. So, you know, as I have a chronic illness, and some days, you know, there's so much pressure of like, you know, got to be out and loud and running around and doing 1,000 things. And some days resistance simply is, you know, getting out of bed, or, you know, making sure that I eat enough. And I think it's so important to be talking about diverse types of resistance and inclusivity and resistance, because there's these pressures of like, oh, you're a bad activist, or, you know, you're a bad feminist, or whatever it is, if you're not doing X, Y, Z, and which is incredibly exclusive and incredibly harmful, and falls back into that model of, you know, mainstreaming oppression of like, this is the one way that you should look and the one way that you should be. And it's drawing on that kind of very patriarchal white idea of like science and data and numbers and action, and rather actually no, like realistically, things like music and emotion and storytelling and whatever it is, small rituals are equally some cases, if not more, as powerful and as important, but those things have historically been feminized and therefore of less value. So yes, go nuts. Resistance is everything, and just live your lives and be successful. And I think that's one of the most important things you can do.
There's an old saying, and I love bell hooks, by the way. There's an old saying that personal is political, political is personal, and that happens to be the lives of being disabled, especially when you're visibly disabled. For a Māori woman, having this on my face makes me very political. It's a statement. And for being in a wheelchair, it's a statement. Now, for Golwes, yes, she is a big draw card, and now she's come out as having MS. And I knew about it a long time before she came out, and I don't think she knew I knew, but it was for her to say it. And I think that's fantastic, but she's not part of our community yet. She hasn't been at the front lines of our community. She hasn't been at the grassroots level of disability. And so she needs to also be supported to understand her own journey, because she's a newbie to all this. And it's going to be very hard for her. So the sad thing for us is suddenly we go, yay, we've got a voice in Parliament. Fantastic, you know. But she doesn't know the nuances. And I remember when newer disabled, like Paki and that, when they first started coming forward, they had all these ideas and things. And when you've been a veteran of 40, 50 odd years, you kind of sit back and look and go, yeah, you think we haven't been trying? You know, it's great to see the enthusiasm, but what they forget is some of us have tried and tried and tried. And then the next generation come and go, yeah, it's right, we're going to do what the other lot didn't do because they failed. It's not that. It's the very fact the system does not want to let us succeed. It works better at dividing. And one of the reasons I know this is, as a Māori, the foreshore and seabed is a big example. When Māori are divided, we don't have a strong collective voice. One of the times we do is when we are collectively agreed on something. And with the foreshore and seabed, we were. Over 20,000 people attended. Another event that got changed was when Brian Tamaki, Destiny Church, went to Parliament. You know, enough is enough kind of thing. My son, who's a young gay man then, he's still young, but he's, you know, a younger gay man then, he was at uni. He went to the protest and he came back and said to me, Mum, I've never been so frightened in my life because of the aggression that they showed towards the LGBTQI community there. And that was on legal marriage. One does have to be prepared to not be afraid, but my son's never been one that goes to protest. He does it on social media. He does it through challenging people around their statements. He does it in other ways. And, you know, we've got to be sure we don't lose those voices, but you do need to know, and I think what Jala said is absolutely right. And I'm sure, Laura, you know, your process as well, during the action station, I think getting a matariki, a holiday each year, is something that, you know, Māori have asked for years and years and years. Sometimes we get caught up in the big picture. We forget to get into the tiny bits that need to be done to make change happen. And the action station protest is a tiny bit to make change happen. And the other thing with my wanting to do the Disabilities Act in the ministry, well, I've been asked to get hold of you, Laura, and I must do, because we want to do an action station petition to call for that to happen for a Disabilities Act. And I'm just designing a generic letter now to go to all things. Those are other ways of being active. But also, just remember, know your history. Know the disability history and know it well. The whole reason why I have an issue with euthanasia bill is simply because Activism T4 was seen as a compassionate law under Hitler. When they said, and the nurses did it thinking they were being compassionate, caring and loving. And they murdered originally it was said 250,000 disabled. They now think it was far higher. A lot were never registered. They were just killed in the doctor's office or at the maternity office, at the maternity hospital. We've got to remember our history in order to know why the older ones keep harping on to the same issue, but also so you can take it further forward in your own style, in your own way. And always remember that the history, you will repeat history if you don't learn from the past. But one of the successes of activism is if you're sitting here and someone's talking to you about how they need help, listen and hear what they're saying. Don't put your slant on it. Listen to them, hear them, and try and respond to their need, not just your own. Because it's easy to find your own need, but you need to hear what they're saying, not what you're saying, what they're saying.
Cool. Thank you for that. That was great. I think, yeah, Joel, I totally hear what you say about sometimes just doing the bare minimum is resistance in itself. I often say that self-care is a form of resistance because in a way it is, especially for disabled people, you know, we're told that, you know, you have to be up, you have to be working every day. That's how like capitalist, ableist society works. And so sometimes the mere act of just staying inside because, you know, the act of getting out of the house is just too much physically for you that day or mentally. And, you know, you beat yourself up for it. But I think that mere act of doing that and looking after yourself is resistance in itself, which I try and practice. But yeah, I think we can all learn how to look after ourselves a bit better. Cool. So unless there's, we have a question, I think. So she asks, one major concern / confusion I have is why is there such a lack of Moldy support within mental health and addiction? I only had one Moldy service available to me and they failed me and were terribly run as a service compared to the other services. Where do I start looking into this whole issue? It's a great question. Yeah, go for it.
Gosh, sorry. Laura, come in anytime. It's a hard one. You've only really got mainstream services, but there are some Māori services, but they're very hard to find. And one of the problems is the Ministry of Health have only ever funded 1% of all health funding going into HOARDA funding, into services. So we're 18% of the population, but we get 1% of the health funding. The Health Ministry has failed and deemed itself to be incompetent. It is not capable of providing appropriate care and services to disabled, to Māori disabled, to mental health services, to Māori mental health, all of those areas. Now, under lockdown, they provide, and under their budget, this coalition provided millions towards mental health support, but we have yet to see it come out. We don't have the people in the services because they burn out, they get exhausted, they get caught up under mainstream, and any kaupapa Māori is few and far between. I know that I've been part of the Koe Ora plan, which is Pai Nui's plan, they're trying to develop a plan to do their own support, to get their funding to run their own services, essentially. That's mental health, health and disability, all of it, needs assessments, the whole lot. And so they're designing a plan. Now, if that's the case, that's one of the largest iwis will start to affect change. I can't say that's there now because it's not there now. But the thing is, you don't give up. I know you're exhausted. Believe me, some days I'm so tired that I'm just crying on my wife's shoulder saying I can't take anymore. It's normal to get that tired. That's why it's so important you take time out to care for yourself. And one of those things, when I'm exhausted and I forget, my mate will say to me, look, we're going away for a weekend and we're actually planning something away. It doesn't have to be somewhere expensive. You know, you can just go somewhere where there's a bit of bush, a bit of ocean, and feel nature again, because that for me is my cleansing place, really. Or I go to the temple because I'm a Buddhist. So I go to the Buddhist temple and I spend some time, have a lovely vegetarian kai, always around food. I don't know if that's my Māori thing or just me. And the temple just gives you that calmness and that pace. What is it that gives you that ability to find the peace of mind to replenish yourself, to get back into the battle? The first thing you need to be doing is start to hook up with the networks, and you'll find them. They are there. Hook up in with them and then start agitating from the inside. And it may be like, you know, for me, I go straight to the minister. So this is one of the keys of being well connected, and it's taken me 30 years to get connected. So it doesn't happen overnight. But during lockdown, for instance, I had a disabled mother bawling, ringing me up, crying, absolute mess, lockdown 4. Her adult daughter had been coughed over by a nurse doing cares. Her adult daughter is immune compromised. And then they threatened to kick the mother out because she asked why the woman wasn't masked, why she was at work, why she didn't have a mask or gloves on to do bloods on her daughter. Now, the charge nurse came in and threatened her, told her, you've got to leave, security's on its way. So I said to the mother, hold fire. This is lockdown, remember? No one's available to you. So I said, hold fire, tell them you've contacted your lawyer. They're not to do anything until the minister gets in touch with them. And I rang Carmel, and she reminded me that it was DSS, which is Jenny Salisa. So I messaged Jenny on Facebook. I said to her, Jenny, I need to talk to you, it's urgent. She rang me back. We had an hour and a half conversation. I got hold of Audrey. She got hold of Audrey, who's the Deputy Commissioner, Disabilities Commissioner for MOH. Told them the scenario. They went back. Needless to say, the mother didn't leave. The daughter got the surgery, and they were more careful about how they dealt with it. So learn to get connected well. Get very well connected to those you need to. Get to the political meetings, whichever party. I've gone bipartisan. I've had to work with national over the euthanasia bill with some national people. I never thought I feel like I've sold myself out to my soul on that one. But in the end, I found out that there's people, it's a learning curve for me. There are good and bad in every single party. There are people that you'll like and not like in every single party. People you'll agree and not agree with in every single party, but ACT and the brand new conspiracy theory parties that have just formed. So please don't join them. I know they appeal to the young, but please don't join them. They just a bit on the fringe, that lot. And maybe you do want to, okay. But this whole thing of being exhausted is a natural part of being disabled. So the first thing you've got to do is find out, slowly move your way in and get to know the people you need to get to know and become known to them. Do it through either your studies, where you get heard, through publications, if you're academically minded. Do it through joining a political party, and then they get to know you as you turn up at meetings. Do it through vlogs or blogs, and you send them out, and do a public page and do it as a thought leader, which is what I do every day. Do what you are comfortable with doing, but make sure you connect to the right networks, the right people who will then lead you into the path that you want to get change. Don't do it alone, do it collectively. Go with a friend, go with somebody, but don't, just remember, if you want to approach a politician, you employ them. We pay their wages. They are bound to us, their boss, not them to you. So if they start to get lippy, like a couple of them try, I remind them that I employ them, and as their employer, I may have to think about a new review on whether they keep their job at the election. So, now is the time to be politically active. Do it, use it, be loud, be proud, and go for it.
I'll just add one quick thing, if that's all right, which is related to self-care and related to mental health and related to strategy, which is there's this tool called the spectrum of allies, which folks can look up, but it's basically this idea that you can segment people into 5 groups, generally speaking. There are the people who really strongly agree with you. There are the people who a little bit agree with you, but they're not really taking any action. There are the people who are neutral on the issue that you care about. There are the people that a little bit disagree with you, but they're not taking a lot of action. And then there's the people that vehemently disagree with you. We can waste a lot of time and energy arguing with the people who vehemently disagree with us. And we are better off using our energy and our time and our resources, which are finite, on getting more of the passive people to be more active and getting more of the neutral people to be more passive allies. And so it's all about moving people just one segment over, closer into the core of the work that we do together. And I think in this age of social media, which has sort of exacerbated polarization or really revealed polarization, or Facebook benefits from our polarization, because the more we're arguing in the comment section, the more they're able to show us ads, and then the more billions that Mark Zuckerberg makes. So I think it's really important in the age of forced polarization through 24-hour news cycles and social media that profits from that, to actually tap out where you can. And I say this as a person who has used the power of the internet to build the platform that I have today, to coordinate the movement that I'm a part of today. It is really, really important to turn off devices and to not get sucked in arguing with people you don't agree with on the internet. And so yeah, that would be my last thing to share that I hope is useful to folks.
Awesome, thank you. Great, yeah, I think everyone falling into the trap of arguing with people on Facebook can be tempting, but never goes down well. Awesome, so unless anyone else has any more questions, I think it's probably a good time to wrap up so we can let our very busy panelists get back to their lives and their awesome mahi. So Pāti, oh, he's gone, but we'll say anyway, thank you. Laura, Jala and Huhana, thank you so much for joining us today. I thought I was being quite ambitious by inviting you all. I was like, oh, you know, I'll invite them, but we'll see. And I was like so shocked and like amazed that everyone was like keen. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm sure we can all agree that the insight you've given us today is truly inspiring. And even though us disabled folk don't like that word, but yeah, I thank you so much for all the work you do to create social positive change, because as we all know, it's certainly tough work, but it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you. And thank you for everyone who came. We really appreciate your support. And final thank you to Blake and Charlie from the team at the Leadership Day, and for VUW and for Disability Services, and for the exec, my exec, the Disabled Students Association. Thank you for all your support. And yeah, follow us on Facebook, because we're going to have lots more events like this. Cool, great.
Thanks, Alice.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone.
Thanks so much. Mā te wā.